Good morning. So, tomorrow, the weather looks good. Weather looks nice. So we're going to spend some time outside making some observations. So one of the important characteristics of life, which is what we're going to spend a chunk of today talking about, is water. So there's a couple different properties of water that we've discussed. One of them was referred to the high specific heat value of water. So we talked kind of in general some statements like, hey, you know, like Seattle, West Coast, next to a big body of water, it has some impact on their overall temperatures. Mr. Lukey put this activity together, and if you look, and I actually looked up these, the latitudes of these, and we can talk about that in just a little bit. But it's comparing Wausau, Wisconsin and Glen Arbor, Michigan, and if we look at kind of their average temperatures. Okay? So we get a graph that looks like this. So the dotted line for our heat is Wausau, where our solid line is Glen Arbor. I think those are solid lines. Are they more?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a solid line. Okay, so if we go through and we take a look at this, we can kind of draw some general average temperature comparisons. So on average, how does temperature of Wausau compare to Glen Arbor in the winter months? Number one, how are the winters? So January, February, November, December. What can you tell us about the average temperatures, because that's what this graph is looking at. If we look at this graph, it says normal average temperatures at Wausau. What's true about the average temperatures in Wausau compared to Glen Arbor? So we're talking from November, December, January, February. Yeah. They're colder, right? And on average, our temperatures are colder. Now this is in degrees Fahrenheit. So we'd have to kind of figure out like how much colder if we really wanted to, but general trend is Wausau tends to be colder than Glen Arbor. Okay, what about from May to June? May to June. Yeah, Roger. Our
May to June, they're actually warmer.
Which ones? In Glen Arbor.
Warmer.
Who's warmer? I'm sorry?
Wausau, Wisconsin is actually warmer
In May and June, yep. What about in July and August? Now that's not what that question asked, but what's true about July and August? What do we notice that's starting to happen to Wausau compared to Glen Arbor?
Temperature kind of dips
It
down.
starts to dip down a little bit, right? It's close, okay? But in Wausau, we're a little bit warmer in May and June, but then we start to cool off a little bit sooner than they do. A little bit, okay, a little bit. So if we go through and we put a mark on the map of where Wausau is, and then we go through and we put a mark where Glen Arbor is, what kind of general observation do you notice about the latitude of those two? Like how far up the map are we compared to them? About. We're pretty close. And I looked up the latitudes of these. Everybody know what our latitude in Wausau is really, really close to? How many degrees above the equator are we really close to here in Wausau?
10 to 15?
Nope.
5?
Isn't it like 55?
Nope, close. Well, off by about 10. We're about 45. We're about 45 degrees north. Our latitude is about that. So we're about halfway between the equator and the North Pole. I think 45 degrees north is just a little bit north of Wausau, if I believe. It's just a little bit north of Wausau. We're at like 40, I looked it up, we're at like 44.9, something like that. And Glen Arbor is like 44.8. They're really close. Okay, so the idea is we're at the same latitude. Now, what that tells us is like angle of the sun. We're getting the same like direct sunlight, the same angle of the incoming sunlight as they are. Pretty close. But really the big difference is between where they are on the map versus us. And you're gonna have to help me because I didn't remember where, I think, isn't it like right Up or down from here?
Down a little bit.
Down,
Right
and
there.
it's on the coast, right?
Yeah, I think right there.
Like right about there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're about the same latitude, and if you look up their actual latitudes, we're really, really, really close to them. So degrees above the equator, we're pretty close, which means we get the same angle of sunlight. But what do they have just to the west of them?
Michigan.
Lake Michigan. Is Lake Michigan a big lake or a small lake?
Big.
It's a big lake. It's called a Great Lake for a reason. It's really, really, really big. Okay? General trends of weather patterns. Which way does the wind tend to blow? West to east, east to west, north to south, south to north. Generally west to east. Okay, so generally the winds will blow from the west coast to the east coast. General trends. Okay? Do we sometimes get winds out of the east? Yeah. Do we sometimes get them out of the north? Yeah, dude. Okay, it depends on pressure systems, but general trends. So you have this air mass, chunk of air, that is blown across Minnesota, western Wisconsin until it hits us. A lot of land. But now, when you get to Glen Arbor, that air has now blown across like the width of Lake Michigan. Big body of water. Do the Great Lakes sometimes freeze over? When we say freeze over, like let ice from one side to the other. Sometimes. Is that super common? No, it's not, okay? So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Lake Superior is an even bigger Great Lake, and that one they talk about ice. I think that's a very rare occurrence when it ices all the way over. But Lake Michigan sometimes does, but a lot of times it doesn't. It's just too big, there's too much water, it retains too much heat because water has a relatively high specific heat value. So it's kind of like this big buffer. Okay, so what happens in the wintertime is we have water, if it's not frozen, what's the temperature at a minimum?
Above like 52 degrees.
Above 32 degrees, right? It has to be above 32 degrees or it should be freezing. Well, okay, I shouldn't say it must. It's gonna be above 32 degrees, or right on that cusp, because some of it will freeze and some of it won't. However, to the west of us in the winter, we have nothing but snow and land. Okay, so we get air blowing across snow, 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 compared to they're blowing across open water, 32, 32, 32. So what happens is that air temperature, the air over the lake tends to pick up some of that moisture, and it actually warms up the air slightly. So their wintertime temperature should be slightly warmer, and we can see kind of that general trend. Now what also happens in the question about May versus June, that's when we're starting to warm up into like mid-summer. Okay, we're actually not officially in summer because summer doesn't start till like June 21st, 22nd, something like that. But we're on a warming trend, okay? We're getting more direct sunlight. But what we noticed was Wausau tends to warm up faster than Glen Arbor. Our temperatures are slightly higher in May and June than they are. Why? Because again, they got cold. Now it's the opposite. Now you have air blowing across 30, 40 degree water where we got land that's sitting at like 50, 60 degrees. Okay, and then what happens when we start to cool, they tend to warm. It's this giant buffer we could refer to that kind of helps hold heat in both the winter and in the summer. It also keeps them a little bit cooler. Now this doesn't talk about weather in terms of like precipitation, but if I had to make a prediction, well, let me rephrase it. If you had to make a prediction, what would you guess about the amount of precipitation they get? Do you think they get more or less precipitation than us?
They probably get more since they're closer to the lake than us.
They're closer to the lake, and that water, the air is going to be blowing across the lake. And what causes precipitation? Water vapor, right? And when the clouds get saturated, the rain comes down. And if you're constantly blowing air across this open water, then our temperatures tend to get a little bit higher. Or I'm sorry, they get more water moisture, therefore we should get more precipitation. So this is kind of is just a way to look at some temperatures and say, hey, it kind of does. Okay, this is trying to show you that big bodies of water act as a big buffer temperatures. Okay. All right, let's switch gears. Tomorrow, we are heading outside. We are going to be on a quest to search for life and non-life, okay? So we are going to look for living and non-living things. So when we start talking about characteristics of life, and we're going to say, hey, you should find some living things, water is crucial for life as we know it. So when we go through and we look for life, we look for water. Now this is, when we talk about biology, if we break the word down, bio means life, ology means study of. So when we talk about biology, we talk about the study of life. All right, so characteristics of life. There's 7 characteristics of life that we are going to talk about that all, in order for an organism to be classified as living, they must have all 7 of them. They must have all 7 characteristics. Tomorrow we're going to go outside. You're going to take some pictures. Make sure you bring your iPad. We're going outside. Make sure you bring your iPad. Maybe you want to bring a sweatshirt along. It might be. When I walked in, it was like 50-some degrees this morning. I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow, 60-ish. Maybe you want to bring a sweatshirt along. Should be relatively nice. We're going to go back into the woods. It has to have all 7 of these characteristics. So you're going to go through and you're going to try to find 7 different living things, and each one to represent one of these. And then you're also going to find 7 non-living things, and you're going to say, hey, this thing is not living because it doesn't show blank. Okay? Now these 7 things are going to be the next 7 slides. Well, I think there's a couple that doubled up. But if you miss, I see people writing down to try to catch all 7. If you don't have all 7 of these written down right now, as we go to the next slide, like we'll talk about like this is number 2, this is the grows and redevelops. Okay? But you must have all 7 characteristics in order to be classified as a living thing. Now this is our list of characteristics. Different texts will have slightly different versions of these, but this is what we're going to use for tomorrow. Okay?
Can you wait a minute?
Nope. Because on each slide these will be here. So this is, again, is number 1. So number 1, if you didn't get number 1, responding to stimuli. All living things detect changes in their environment. And if you need to, just for the record, these are linked in Canvas. These slides are as well too.
Not that I see.
Maybe I didn't publish it. So they are, when we talk about responding to life, all living things detect change in their environment and they respond to them. So for example, your pupil will dilate based upon stimuli. The venous flytrap will close when something goes in it. So they respond to stimuli, an external stimulus. So they get like poked, they get prodded, okay, they react, they respond. Come on, Canvas doesn't want to look. Okay, so they respond to the stimuli. Number 2, growing and developing. This is characteristic number 2, growing and developing. All living things grow and develop. All living things grow and develop. For example, a plant seed may look like a lifeless pebble, but under the right conditions, it will grow and develop into a plant. Organisms grow and develop at different rates. I'm always amazed to watch birds grow. And I say birds because that's one that you can really see a lot of change very quickly. Okay, you think about a young bird sitting in a nest in a tiny egg, say a robin. And it hatches, it's got like no feathers at all, and it just sits there and chirps and mom has to feed it. And it doesn't take long, and they have feathers, and it doesn't take long, and now they're flying, and it doesn't take long, and they look the same size as the adult. Slightly different colorations, slightly smaller, but really, really similar. Okay, and they're able to fly, and if birds migrate, they're able to make these huge migration patterns across big stretches of land.
Has everybody seen like a freshly hatched or a newly hatched baby bird? I'm not talking about the cute fluffy ones like the pink. You go, oh, what is that thing? Yeah.
We'll look at chickens even too, right? Chickens are a great example of that. If you were to raise chickens because you were raising them for meat, Just for the record, they are posted under today's.
I
Shoot,
just
I have it
found
under
it.
the wrong spot. There is not a separate thing, it's at the week headers, which they are there though. Oops. So they are here in today's agenda. The slides are right here. And it says starting on slide number 7, but we hit a bunch of slides, so we weren't gonna do them. But they should be here. Okay. I think about loons. Loons are something I observe on our lake each summer, and it's not long, and that loon was like sitting on mom's back, swimming, needing help getting fish, and right around this time, they're still not quite ready. The adults tend to leave a little bit early before the juveniles do, but then this year's newly hatched loon will then make the flight. I think they migrate down to like Florida, or even sometimes further than Florida, but I think Florida is a common destination for a loon. You know, to go from a tiny little chick to flying to Florida on their own without even their adults, with their mom and dad, pretty impressive.
So just think of planting a garden.
Yeah,
You know, what, you put your seeds in and then they sprout, and there's some, actually, Mr. Davies planted some radish seeds in that, that brownish container right there. But if you've ever had a garden or seen someone's garden, I've got a colleague of mine that grows pumpkins, like 500-600 pound pumpkins. Do they start out as 100, 200, 400 pound pumpkin, or is there a definitive growth and development? Well, obviously, right? It goes from a seed, sprout, grows and develops until we get to that adult, whatever it may be, if it's a pumpkin or a loon or.
I would assume it's a genetically modified seed, I would assume, since they grow it that big.
not necessarily genetically modified, but there's different variations amongst organisms. So some pumpkins, gourds, we could refer to them, will only grow this big, but then some of the similar variety or similar species would grow to be giant pumpkins. But you compare that, we talk about how quick some of these things grow. Pumpkins, 100 pounds, loons making 1,000-mile flights. Look at us. You're sitting 15, 16 years old in this classroom, and some of you are and some of you are not as big as you ever will be. Some of you are still growing taller. Some of you have reached your height. Okay? So it really, really, really depends. You know, a loon is able to make a 1,000-mile journey in a couple months. They're independent, where you're a couple years of constantly needing to be fed and changed by your parents. Okay? So that weaning period is very different. So they grow and develop at very different rates. Reproduction is our third bullet point. Reproductions. All living things are capable of reproduction, and reproduction is a process by which living things produce offspring. There's two general classifications of reproduction that we're going to talk about in this class. There's something called asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. You, just for the record, are a product of sexual reproduction, not asexual. Asexual reproduction is when there was only one parent. A single parent was needed in order for this organism to make anew. Sometimes they can simply split in half, and they produce a direct clone of one another where they are genetically identical to each other. Now, this could be a single-cell organism like an amoeba, splitting through the process of mitosis to make two organisms. It could be. It could be that plant that's hanging by that window. All of that plant was a single plant that I bought at Fleet Farm a couple years ago. And what happens is it grows these long tails, I don't know what you want to call them, leaves, vines. And by cutting them and sticking them in soil, they reroot. But it's still the same original plant. They are genetically clones of one another. They're genetically identical to one another. There's no genetic variation. It's simply taking a cutting and putting it back in. That's asexual. One parent, asexual reproduction. Again, you are a product of sexual reproduction, which is more complex. You need two parents. It increases genetic variation, which is good and bad. We'll talk about those advantages and disadvantages in a little bit. Offspring are often, I don't love the word mix of parents' genes, but it's a recombination of parents' genes. It's not truly a mixture, but you got some genes from both parents, and they may look different than their parents. You might have some similar characteristics to your mom and your dad, but you often have different characteristics than your mom and dad too. I want to say this now. Well, do I want to say this? Sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is not required for sexual reproduction. Okay? A lot of times people think sexual reproduction must be sex, sexual intercourse. That's not true. Flowers, plants, reproduce sexually, but they don't have sex. They don't have sexual intercourse with each other. Okay? Pollen is the male format of, is equivalent to a human sperm. It's got the male counterpart. And when it lands on the pistil on the flower, I think I have the parts of the flower, that's sexual reproduction. A combination of two gametes to recombine. So, sexual reproduction was two parents, recombination of things. Fish, perfect example, okay?
There's no intercourse going on here. What that is an example of sexual reproduction. This is the milt.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was confused.
Female drops the eggs, male comes along and broadcasts the milt or the sperm over the eggs. Sexual reproduction, but not intercourse.
Okay, so that's just a common misconception, so I think if we just put that out there now, hopefully we'll kind of take care of that. Homeostasis is a common recurring theme that we'll see throughout this. All living things need to maintain a relatively constant internal environment. Constant internal environment. Internal conditions may stay stable regardless of the conditions around them. We call that homeostasis. A great example of homeostasis is body temperature. Okay, is body temperature. If we get too cold, we start to shiver. It's our body's response to try to warm us up. Okay, it's contracting your muscles over and over and over again. It's like exercising, kind of. Okay, your muscles are contracting. If you get too hot, you sweat, because evaporation is a cooling process and it will actually pull heat from your body in an attempt to try to cool you off. So on a hot summer day, you sweat. On a hot, humid day, you don't cool off as much because that sweat doesn't evaporate as fast, right? You need that evaporation in order to cool your body. On a hot but dry day, they always talk about like the Southwest, it's a dry heat, really huge difference. That sweat will evaporate from your skin very rapidly, and it doesn't feel as hot as like a 90-degree day in Arizona doesn't feel like a 90-degree day in Florida because of the humidity difference. Okay, so it's again pulling that moisture or that heat away. Okay, but that's a good example. Is body temperature. There's other ones. All living things have something that we refer to as complex chemistry. All living things, even the simplest forms of life, have complex chemistry. Organisms have large complex molecules, and they have to undergo chemical reactions to stay alive. Example, they take in and then they use energy. Food, right? That's a complex chemistry. We take and we eat food, and we break that food down into a form that our body and our cells can use, and we'll talk about it here soon. And this is needed to carry out all the functions of life. So we often talk about these four classes of organic molecules that are being crucial, that are complex chemistry. So proteins, lipids, fats, and carbohydrates are food sources that we eat, or nucleic acids is critical in terms of DNA and RNA, so our genetic information is also built up of lots and lots of complex molecules. And the order that we put them have different messages. We'll talk about that later this year too. So they have complex chemistry. All living cells must consist of cells. All living things, must consist of cells. The cell theory, okay? All living things come from cells. All cells come from existing cells, and cells are the basic unit of life. That's something I told you you're going to want to know. All living things must consist of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. Some cells appear very different from another, but they have very similar functions. Prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, nucleus versus no nucleus. They're still cells, they still carry out similar things, but their structures are different. A plant cell versus an animal cell. Still a cell, but they carry out different functions because they have different organelles. Like plants have chloroplasts, they go through photosynthesis. We don't, but they're still cells.
So if it has cells, living, but if it doesn't have cells, can you ever make a case for it being alive? No.
So like a virus, SARS-CoV-2, coronavirus, is not made up of cells, it actually infects cells. So because it doesn't have cells, it's not a living thing. Viruses are not living things. Just for the record. And they have to pass this genetic trait on to their offspring. DNA, RNA is a pretty common thing that when we talked about nucleic acids on a previous slide, I mentioned it. That's what we're talking about. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, or RNA, ribonucleic acid. Heredity, chromosomes, these are all things that we talk about when we talk about passing these characteristics on. Asexual reproduction. Here is an example of asexual reproduction. I believe strawberry plants do this. They have a main plant and they send out these runners, and then that will start to grow into the ground, and then that will form like a new plant, but it's still part of the original plant, the main plant. It's just kind of an offshoot. Genetically identical to one another. Genetically identical to one another. Okay, so tomorrow, this is what we're going to do. We'll talk more tomorrow. We're going to go outside and do a scavenger hunt. You're going to take some pictures of 7 different living things and 7 different non-living things, and you're going to say, hey, why is this living, why is this not? And you're going to take one picture for each characteristic, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay? So, we want to wrap up water a little bit. We did that little temperature comparison at the beginning of class. We went through and we did like 9 different stations with a water exploratorium. If you were gone both days for the water exploratorium, we excused you from that assignment in Canvas. Okay, if you were gone both days, you were excused from that assignment. If you were here one of the 2, the expectation is that you were working and then you submitted and shared that with us and you turned that in. Anything that has been turned in for that water exploratorium has been graded. Anything that has not been turned in is flagged as missing and a 0 in Canvas. So you should take a look at that and see if your water exploratorium is 0, an E, and missing. And if so, submit what you have. Because if you were here one of the 2 days, you have something done. Okay? Maybe you should have more done, maybe you shouldn't. I'm not saying it has to be complete. We just want to see that you did some of that activity with us. Okay? It's not something we're going to directly test on, but it is something that we're going to come back to and build on. So take a look in Canvas to make sure that water exploratorium that you have submitted it. Because if it's submitted, it's been graded. If not, it's a 0. There's lots of different properties of water. The 2 biggest ones that were, well, I shouldn't say the 2 biggest, 2 big ones are cohesion and adhesion, where water sticks to itself, cohesion, adhesion when it sticks to something else. So with the little bit of time remaining, we're going to do this, we're going to try this. And you probably have done this already before in the past, but it's kind of a fun thing to do. For an amazing prize, you just be honest and truthful, because we'll try to come up with who's the winner and who's not the winner. You're going to do 2 things. So the yellow cups on half the room are going to have rubbing alcohol. They don't have it yet because it evaporates. We're going to put some in there. The red cups have water in it. You're going to get a penny. Okay? And there's some eyedroppers in there. What your goal is to see how many drops of water you can fit on the head of a penny. You've done this before. Okay? You've done this before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. If you take a drop of water, because of cohesion, they stick together. And then you get this bubble picture, bubble effect. Side views are pretty cool, by the way. You might want to take a look at it from the side. See how many drops you can get on that head of water. You're going to have to be the judge. And at some point, it's going to overflow off the sides. Now the other thing, or we could do is we could just do water. Maybe we should just do water because of our time.
Time-wise, yeah.
The yellow cups will also have water. Because we'll put some water on those too. There's lots of droppers in them. There's probably too many droppers in them. Well, whatever, they're droppers. Okay, so you're gonna need to get a penny, which is in a bag that we will make sure each and every one of you gets a penny. Okay?
One on the back,
That,
water.
oh yeah, just from there. So you're gonna try to see how many drops of water you can fit on. Then you have to tell us, you can try it more than once. The thing is, when you're done, you're gonna make a little puddle, you gotta clean up your little puddle, dry your penny, and you can try it again. Head side versus tail side, maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't, okay? And then you're gonna report to us and we'll keep a record of who had the most. And then tomorrow, whoever had the most will win an amazing prize. Okay? So we can get you some pennies. We got a couple minutes, fun activity.
Have
See
you
how many
decided
drops you
prize
can
yet?
get.